I did a thing. So, it's my birthday. Well, if you're watching this on Patreon, it's my birthday. If you're watching this on YouTube, yesterday was my birthday. And for my birthday this year, the only thing I want is for you guys to DM me photos of your pets or any animals you must have met this week. And because I'm turning 26 this year, I figured it would be fun to share with you 26 random art tips that I've collected over the years and just put them together in one video, covering pretty much every aspect of art. But you know me, I cannot function without an organized list, so today's video is going to be divided into 5 sections. So we're going to look at 5 sketching tips, 5 color and light tips, 5 general rendering and painting tips, 5 learning and development tips, and 6 random little tiny tweaks that you can make to your painting now to punch it up. As always, if you enjoyed this video and find it helpful, then let me know by giving it a big thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss a future upload on this channel. Also, fair warning, this is gonna be a long video. I haven't seen the timestamp yet. You probably have, but just looking at the word count on the script, this is huge. But now, grab a slice of birthday cake and let's dive in. Before we jump in, I just quickly want to say thank you so very much for 3,000 subscribers. Bruh, I don't even know that many people IRL, let alone online, so it is absolutely incredible that so many of you genuinely enjoy my content and like to support it. Thank you so very much, I love you guys, and I'm so grateful that I get to share some of my favorite stuff with you. And special birthday shout out to my amazing patrons Hazel Redleaf, Sabine, Brendan McCleary, O Lavender Moon, and Nicole. You guys make all of this possible. Thank you so much for your support. I love you guys. Alright, let's dive in. Before you even get into painting anything at all, you're gonna want to put down a sketch. And honestly, sketching is probably the most underrated part in speed paint, but it is literally the most important step in your workflow because it is where you take that abstract thought that's in your head and turn it into visual elements. Bro, this is literal alchemy and sketching doesn't get nearly enough love or attention. Hashtag sketching rights now. So here's 5 tips that will help you make the most out of your sketches. Number 1, always remember that your sketchbook is for you and you alone. Early in my drawing days, I'd go around showing everyone my sketchbook, and while it's awesome and important to be proud of what you draw, I found that sharing around every one of my sketches caused me to develop some very deep insecurities. For one thing, I wasn't allowing myself the freedom to mess up and quote waste pages in my sketchbook. And as you can guess, this is a surefire way to literally censor your art before it even has the time to enter this world. Plus, people would obviously offer criticism on my initial sketches, which while they might seem helpful at first, I actually think it is the exact opposite of helpful. Your sketches are your initial thought translations, and if you think about the idea of a thought, it is shapeless, formless, completely abstract. So when you're trying to take this abstract thought form and turn it into lines and shapes, there is no way you're gonna nail it on the first try. Getting critique on your initial sketches is like critiquing a toddler's grammar. You're literally just getting started, and criticism can wait until you have a finished product. These days, I guard my sketchbook with my life. I decide which parts of it I'm comfortable sharing online and which pages are purely for my own purposes. And I highly encourage you to be just as protective of your own sketchbook and exercise your control over who sees it and which parts of it they see. Trust me, you'll feel a lot more freedom when jotting down your initial abstract ideas. And speaking of freedom, tip number 2 is to loosen up your sketches. This is something I learned the hard way, but don't ever start your sketch with structure or proportions. Focus on scribbling down your general ideas in a very abstract form. Your first sketch should never be your only sketch, because then you're putting too many restrictions on the idea. By starting super structured, you're essentially doing the same thing to yourself as we discussed in the first tip. You're offering too much criticism too early in the process, and as a result, your idea doesn't even get to breathe before it is squashed and hammered into a certain mold. So loosen up your arm and your mind and start super abstract, focusing purely on making some marks. And then when you start to see an idea emerge from those marks, only then are you ready to add some structure. Which brings us to tip number 3, which is iterative sketching. A successive iteration of something is basically an updated version of it. And like I just said, your first sketch should never be your only sketch. And this is where the idea of iterative sketching comes in. Once you have your scribbles down, lower the opacity of them and create a new layer. On this new layer, you start to tighten up those marks and start to add in some definition. And once you have your first iteration, you can lower the opacity of this new layer, create a new layer on top of it, and tighten things up even more. Let me tell you a little secret, every artist does this. If not on screen, they do this in their sketchbooks that you don't see. If you ever get a chance to, look up the sketchbooks of some popular artists and you'll find a whole bunch of sketches and concepts that went into a single illustration. No one gets their sketch perfect the first time around, and it takes multiple iterations until you have the perfect sketch that you can start inking or painting in. And since we spoke about concepts that go into an illustration, here's a tip for those of you who do a lot of character concept art, especially when it comes to designing the costume and hairstyle. Create a standard character sheet that includes mannequins and head stencils. For instance, here's a female body base that I created for all of my concepting needs. I made it myself from scratch and it took like 20 minutes of work, but what this does is save me 20 whole minutes every time I want to flesh out a character's costume. I just copy paste this a bunch of times and I can quickly go in and sketch a whole bunch of costumes, or better, costume iterations for a whole bunch of characters. If you do a lot of concept work, try to find all of the standard processes you go through and see if you can turn those into templates. Trust me, it will take maybe one afternoon to put together a standard set of templates, and you'll save hours and hours of work in the long run. And since we're talking about templates, here's one tip that has saved my life when it comes to plotting a scene. Get yourself some custom perspective grid brushes. I can link you guys to my favorite ones in the video description, but what these basically do is stamp a perspective grid onto your canvas. I can't tell you how long I've gone without using these and how embarrassing it was to discover that I was just throwing away time trying to hand draw perspective lines. You've seen me use these in the first paint over video I did a few weeks back, and they will genuinely help you, not just by saving you time, but also by making sure your scene fits into perspective. Don't worry, I have a video coming up next week all about perspective, but yeah, tip number 5, download some perspective grid brushes. Here's another little known trade secret that seems obvious, but very few of us actually consciously use. Always start with a color palette and lighting setup picked out. Here are some color and lighting tips to help your workflow before you've even started painting. Tip number 6 is to create some color keys in thumbnails. Thumbnails are a great way to assess how readable your composition is. You make tiny images of potential scene arrangements and you decide which overall composition you like best. But I suggest taking this a step further and actually using your thumbnails to figure out the best lighting and color palette for your scene. This is especially something I do with my commissions, is to offer the client a variety of color and lighting setups as thumbnails, because it really helps you map out the scene in your mind. A lot of the times, the reason you're having to go back and revise your paintings over and over again is because you didn't have a clear idea of what you were working towards. Having color keys in your thumbnails takes the guesswork out of it because you're only really painting a few pixels here and there. So if it doesn't work out, you're not stuck with having to rework a giant 8K painting. Thumbnailing will take you an hour tops, and it will save you days and days of revision time. Tip number 7 is a quick one but important nonetheless. Learn how to make custom brushes. No matter what painting software you're using right now, it likely has a brush engine. Take some time to really learn your brush engine and how you can use it to DIY your own custom brushes, especially texture and scatter brushes. You just have to trust me on this one. It will save you loads of time trying to find the perfect brush online when you could just create your own and have it perform exactly the way you want it to. Tip number 8 is another quickie, and it is to learn the hotkey for the eyedropper/color picker tool. And if you have hotkeys on your tablet, map one of the hotkeys to the eyedropper tool. My tablet has 8 hotkeys, and the very bottom one is set to Alt for Photoshop or Control for Critter. And when I press it, it quickly shifts to the color picker tool for as long as I hold it down. Every painting software should have something like this. You need your color picker handy, especially when you're rendering things out. It will help you to shade and texture your paintings a lot quicker than constantly having to select the tool from the toolbar and pick a color and then go back to the toolbar and pick the brush tool again. Find the hotkey for the color picker and map it to one of the hotkeys on your graphics tablet. Tip number 9 is huge in terms of importance, so listen up. Use reference for lighting and color. A lot of the times we restrict our use of photo references to direct studies or pose ideas, but if you want to get the most out of using references, make sure to also grab a bunch of photos to steal the color and lighting setup from. This is a little more advanced and it will take a little bit of getting used to, but once you know how to render the general form and flat lighting for your subject, you can then start to experiment with a bunch of lighting ideas from reference images and apply those to your own painting. It's like doing a photo study but on steroids. Listen, my philosophy is always take what you can from the resources you have and then take it a step further by leveling it up. And using photo references to help your lighting and color choices is doing exactly that. But if you feel like you're not quite at this stage of painting yet, tip number 10 is for you, and it is to paint the same subject in different lighting and colors. Obviously, this is more a practice thing, but it really helped with my environment work especially. When you study a bunch of lighting setups on the same exact subject, you're creating a much more even study because instead of the subject being a variable, it is a constant. So in that way, you're eliminating the possibility that your understanding of light and color is heavily dependent on a specific shape or form. It's like in scientific studies where you try to eliminate as many variables as possible so that your findings are as accurate and precise as they can be. So paint the same exact character or scene in the same exact composition and angle and only vary the color and light. Or if you're feeling ambitious, vary just the color scheme or just the light and just see what that teaches you. Alright, the next 5 tips have to do with just painting and rendering in general. As you can tell, this is turning out to be a long video. Look, just allow it, it's my birthday. So, tip number 11 is very straightforward, and it is to learn how to paint a whole bunch of textures and materials. No matter what the scene or concept you like to paint, it is likely that you're gonna have to paint a whole bunch of materials within a single scene. If you take just a basic character, for instance, here's this random stock image. Yeah, I literally just typed guy into the search bar and this guy popped up. It seems like a pretty basic, simple image, but let's look at how many materials there are in this photo. You have your skin, hair, and eyes. You have glass and metal in the glasses. You have a metal nose ring. You have beard hair, which is different to hair on the head. You have leather, metal, and glass on his watch. You have striped fabric in his t-shirt and what looks like blue cotton or denim trousers, not to mention all the blurry stuff in the background. Now, with such a simple photo, you have more than 10 different material sections, so you can only imagine how many materials a complex scene would involve. In fact, this is why we spent all of April doing material studies on my Patreon tutorial series, and I always recommend learning how to paint some of the common textures you see in your own paintings. As much as photo textures enhance your painting, they'll only really help you if you already understand the visuals of what those textures should look like in your specific scene. So learn how to render materials by hand from scratch, and it will help round off your skill set really nicely. My 12th tip for today is to study the classics. I'm talking old masters who painted with oil on canvas in the light of those old kerosene lamps. There is a reason that their art is still so revered. It's because they knew what they were doing and their work came from years and years of studying life, not just photographs. Obviously, you ideally want to study from life, but I just don't have the patience for that. So I much prefer studying classical art instead because they took the literal world around them and enhanced it through their art. It's like raw material. My personal favorites are Rembrandt, Rubens, and Caravaggio. They have that dramatic lighting setup that I absolutely love, and I could literally do a million studies of their work and it would never be enough. And speaking of studies, this brings us to the halfway mark of this list. Tip number 13 is to experiment with a bunch of different art styles. As an artist, there is probably a very specific painter or show or visual style that got you into painting. For me, it was traditional realism. For you, it might be something else. Maybe you love the comic book aesthetic or are deeply inspired by manga or anime. Whatever it is, I'm sure it is a very specific art style that hooked you in, and you've spent all of your time working hard and trying to perfect that single style. But if you're ready to bring back a bit of fun into your painting process, I highly recommend experimenting with a bunch of different styles. I keep mentioning this, but this is the exact reason why I began doing style studies more seriously, because it allowed me to play with the aspects of drawing and painting that I wouldn't veer towards naturally. In fact, in today's painting, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm actually playing around with Art Nouveau, more specifically the works of Alphonse Mucha. And through all of this experimentation, I've actually found that my own style has evolved because it is now a hybrid of my old style plus anything new that I've picked up along the way. And it is through this process of evolution that you can buy your own unique painting style, which is ultimately what I think we're all working towards, right? So experiment with a bunch of different art styles, because while it may feel like you're distracting yourself from your end goal, I promise you this is only going to bring you closer to discovering your own unique painting style. And that brings us to tip number 14. If there is an easy way to do something, take it. A lot of the times, the art community tends to have a very puritanical stance on painting. I think it's less crazy these days, but I remember when I first started out, digital art wasn't even considered, quote, real art, and photo manipulation was basically seen as equivalent to making a collage in your scrapbook. Thankfully, we as a community now realize that all types of art are equally valid and worthy of the same amount of respect, but even so, as artists, we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to work hard rather than work smart. I did this all the time, just ask my mum, especially with the thing about the templates that I mentioned earlier in this video. For the longest time, the traditionalist in me refused to create a template to save time because I almost saw it as cheating. And you might feel this way about something else, maybe using photo textures or custom stamp brushes. Listen, cheating implies that you're taking something away from someone unfairly. So tracing over someone else's work would be cheating because you're basically taking away money from them by stealing their work that took them ages to create. But making your own life easier without hurting anyone else, where's the cheating in that? I don't know, this is just something I struggle with internally, so if you need to hear this too, here it is. It is not cheating to make your painting process more time efficient. If there is an easier and quicker way to paint without hurting other artists, take it. And on a similar vein, here's a tip that I kind of discovered by accident. Tip number 15, you can literally use any image as your color palette. If you find that picking the right colors for your painting from scratch is way too hard and your paintings never quite have the right color combinations, pick colors from other photos or art. There's this cool free Photoshop plugin called Paletator. I don't think it's been updated in quite a while, but it basically lets you import any image and makes it color pickable, if that's a word. I use it all the time, especially when it comes to skin tones, because it saves me so much time and misery over picking the right colors. While there are loads of amazing pre-made color palettes that other artists have available for you to download, I find that the sheer number of options can be overwhelming when you're painting. So instead, using an image to color pick from can help a lot more than picking a random color from a palette and hoping for the best. I wanted to give this a section of its own because while you could sit down and study every art book from cover to cover, you'll not absorb any of it until you go in purposefully, knowing exactly what you want to learn and why you want to learn it. Here are some important skills I highly recommend every artist learns while they're learning art. So, tip number 16, learn how to construct a character or a scene or an object. While photo studies are well and good, simply studying photos or doing live studies only gives you surface level knowledge, as in you're only taking what you see and replicating it on paper. But doing that is not going to teach you how to paint your own original scenes and characters. Instead, learn how to construct your scene from scratch. Figure out how to start with simple lines and flat shapes and then take it up to build more complex forms. Not only will your studies improve because you now better understand proportions and physics, but the repetitive motion of your construction lines will imprint into your muscle memory, and as a result, you'll be able to construct completely original bodies and landscapes from scratch using only your imagination. And that, you guys, was where the magic of art really stepped in for me, was when I was able to build up original characters without needing any photo reference whatsoever and just letting the sketch take me wherever it wants to take me. It is a beautiful feeling and I really want you to experience it. So start learning how to construct your scene from scratch. It is an absolutely priceless skill. Tip number 17 is for all my illustrators or just 2D artists in general. Learn basic 3D modeling. I always like to say that the biggest improvement in my art has happened in the last couple of years, and that's because I spent pretty much all of late 2019 to early 2020 self-learning 3D modeling and texturing. I didn't get to the animation bit because it wasn't for me, but it's one of those things that are necessary for your growth. Being able to visualize objects and models in three-dimensional space has quite literally helped me expand my mind, in that I am now able to look at my concepts not just as flat two-dimensional images, but also as three-dimensional objects that have depth. But more importantly, 3D modeling really drilled into me the importance of two powerful concepts. One was that as a visual artist painting still images, your only concern should be the surfaces that are visible. Your only goal is to render these surfaces and not worry about anything in the scene that isn't visible to the viewer. And the second concept was the fact that all of the objects in the scene interact with each other. So if you have a hard surface, a soft surface is going to squash around it. If you have masses, they're going to be affected by gravity. And really embedding these mechanics into my subconscious has helped make my work way more dynamic and believable. There are amazing 3D softwares out there, but honestly, just get Blender. It is free and easy to learn, and it does everything you need it to do for this specific purpose. And speaking of purpose, my 18th tip for today is to set concrete learning goals every single month. This is non-negotiable no matter how good you get at art. When you get into the rut of work and productivity and just being on top of everything else, it is so easy to just completely forget all about learning. And I know what you're saying right now because I'm psychic like that. You're saying, ugh, Srish, I really have no time to also add learning to my monthly list of tasks. Don't even give me that. Of course you don't have the time for it right now. You never scheduled it in. but trust me, your skill development, and this applies to any skill at all, mind you, your skill development has to be a priority. And the only way to make it a priority is to physically write it into your to-do list and actually do it. Nope, I don't want to hear it. We're doing this every single month, every single week. Hell, every single day is an opportunity to wipe the slate clean and learn some new habits. And in this case, learning is the new habit. You have to feed your brain, baby, or it will never grow. And speaking of feeding your brain, tip number 19 is to always consume more art than you create. Listen, as a human being, everything that you create is a new perspective on a subject matter that you've already seen before. No, seriously, if you look back at every single thing that you've ever painted, I can promise you can trace back to the inspiring thought. Now, before you come for my throat, this is not me saying there are no original ideas, but rather what I'm saying is that the originality of these ideas comes from how you transmute what you've already seen and heard and felt onto paper. And as you can guess, the only way to keep that transmutation going is if you keep replenishing your source material. So this is me giving you a day pass to literally just watch Netflix or Amazon Prime or what have you all day today, and you can write it off as tax deductible. You're welcome. Hi, Income Tax Department of India. That was a joke. I'm not encouraging tax fraud, only laziness in the name of art. And since we're consuming for inspiration, tip number 20 is to study the different eras and movements in art history. Human history can be tracked really nicely if we look through the different eras of art. You have your early Stone Age art that was about capturing thoughts and ideas in a world before language and organized schools of thought. You have Romanticism, which is about creative expression and freedom. You have Baroque art that is very political and grandiose. You have Realism, which is more a celebration of your everyday life. As society evolves and empires rise and fall, art is really one of the most influential means of recording how the power structures in society shift across generations. Learning how art has changed along the years will really help you learn more than just practical painting skills. It adds a lot of depth and meaning to your work. Whew, we did it, guys. We're finally on the home stretch. So here are 6 tiny little painting tweaks that you can implement right now that will really take your painting to the next level. Number 21 is for my character artists out there, and it is to start with gesture. I've been looking into this very recently because I got some critique about my poses being stiff, and I totally agree, they do be looking stiff. So I've been obsessed with looking at how to make my characters look more natural and fluid, and let me tell you, gesture drawing is the way to go. It allows you to capture movement before you put down structure, and I'm definitely enjoying drawing poses a lot more. Tip number 22 is to play around with lens distortion. In Photoshop, this is under the camera raw filter, but messing around with the lens distortion, as in making it more convex or concave, can really help fix tiny perspective and field of view errors. Try it, it will honestly make a huge difference. Tip 23 is something I use obsessively, and that is to selectively sharpen the image. Painting softwares don't usually have a way to mask in a sharpen filter unless you want to use the sharpen tool and paint it on, but that's too uneven and way too much work. What I do is copy and merge the image, apply a global smart sharpen filter, then just mask out areas that I don't want super sharp. It really helps to add definition to the focal point of your scene without causing everything to look super HDR-ish. On the flip side of this is tip number 24, which is to use a field blur. You could use the field blur filter, but I prefer to do this manually with my layers. But basically, split your painting into foreground, midground, and background. Then apply a blur only to the foreground and background layers, leaving the midground sharp. It instantly adds depth of field to your painting, making it look a lot more spacious because it imitates how a camera would act, focusing on the midground while the fore and background are out of focus. Tip number 25 is to simplify. Take your painting, zoom out until it is the size of a thumbnail, Any elements that you can't see when you're zoomed out, get rid of them. A good composition is usually one where you're able to tell as much of the story as possible with as few objects in the scene as possible. So if it isn't adding to the story, it is clutter, and if your scene is too busy, clutter needs to be the first thing that goes. And finally, my absolute favorite tip and our final tip for today. Tip number 26, finish your painting by applying noise to it. Create a new layer and paint it grey. Generate color noise and set the size to about 300%. Now lower the saturation of the layer, set it to soft light blending mode, and turn down the opacity until you can just see it, but it's not ruining the contrast in your scene. Boom! All of the elements in your scene magically fit right in with each other. You're welcome. So there we have it. I know it's super long, but just consider this my early/late birthday gift to you whenever your birthday falls this year. So happy birthday. I don't even know how it got this long, but here we are. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video regardless of how long it is, and if you have, then let me know by giving it a big thumbs up. Comment below which of these tips you found most helpful and will be using in your workflow. If you'd like to see more of me and my art, then hit that subscribe button and notification bell down below. And if you'd like more longer form, super intensive art tutorials, check out my Patreon, link is in the description. And like I said in the intro, all I want this year is for you guys to send me photos of your pets or just any random animals you meet this week. You can come say hi on my Instagram or join the Discord server. The links for both are in the video description. Please, it's my second birthday in quarantine. I need this. But yeah, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, regardless of how long this video has been. Check out some more videos up here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!